Your physician is never going to care this much. They're not going to study you this much. You have to study you this much. That morning fasting blood sugar, when it only gets to 95 in the morning, you got problems. That's not normal. Yes, you're healthier than most of the people that you're going to have supper with, but that's not normal. Normal is to get that decreased enough glucose that you emptied fat storage, which is where the ketones should be raising in the morning. So I hear all the time, that's impossible. I cannot get my ketones to go up in the morning. That's impossible. I'm like, no, you're just sicker than you think you are. And step one is, let me give you a new lease on life called a restart of your mitochondria, a restart of how those powerhouses are delivering fuel to your body. Step one is you have to know about this thing called insulin, and you have got to change the way you eat. I've seen tons of success where they said, all right, I didn't realize an apple has 16 carbohydrates in it. I'm like, yeah, you're probably not gonna be eating the apple. They want the truth. What's the formula? How do I lose the weight? And what I think our jobs are with these megaphones of platforms to teach people is, well, just don't lie to yourself. I was lying to myself.
Dr. Boz, I'd love to start out with a hypothetical patient. Somebody comes to see you, they're metabolically unwell, overweight, chronic diseases are starting. They say, I'm ready to commit to this. Take me through what I need to do. I'm all in.
Yeah. So
what's the protocol look like?
How old is our patient?
Let's say mid-40s. But anywhere in that middle age realm.
So we call 40 young.
Okay. Younger end of adulthood then.
Yes. And I'm going to make you to get even granular, male or female.
Wow, this is tough. I don't want to get too specific here and then be non-applicable for others.
Boys and girls is not too specific, but they are different metabolisms.
Okay, we'll say male in this case.
Okay, so male metabolism, 40 years old. We have what I like to think of as very resilient mitochondria in that age and gender of a patient. The step one is when they're headed for chronic illness in their 40s. They do have a gift that says, you dial in, we can reverse a lot of these problems. They wait another 20 years and it just does a lot slower repair process. So step one, you look at how patients get better. You must not ignore that there is a hormone that's been dictating that chronic aging process that should not be present in their 40s, but is. And you can see it from a mile away. They've got the extra weight. They've got the, more arthritis than they should. They're only 40 in their 40s. And they've got a tire around their waist that is something they're trying to get rid of. Step one is you have to know about this thing called insulin, and you have got to change the way you eat. So I have seen that patient thousands of times, and I have learned so that I don't get exhausted. I tell them, you go first. You show me that you are really all in by doing 20 total carbohydrates for 1 week, and then I will teach you the next step. In the time where they're trying to figure out what does that exactly mean, what kind of, when you say that to them, they're like, okay, I can do that. Until you start counting carbohydrates and realize, oh Lord, that is a huge change in the menu you're eating. And what I have learned, especially if you want them to succeed, I say, all right, you're going to figure this out. It's going to take you a few days to get to that low of a carbohydrate level. And we're going to have you sip on BHB in the meantime. And they're swallow ketones. And man, Jesse, this formula works because it is hard. They're not coming to me as the first step that they've had that says, dang, I thought 40s were going to feel easier than this. I don't like the way I feel. My brain is slower. My kids think faster than me because I'm tired all the time. And so we're not step one. They have done a few other things. I mean, they've tried, nicotine, caffeine, maybe a different mattress. Hopefully they didn't throw out the wife and kids. They are leaning in to say, it might be you. And step one is, let me give you a new lease on life called a restart of your mitochondria, a restart of how those powerhouses are delivering fuel to your body. So while they figure out what it looks like to have 20 total carbohydrates a day, I'm playing a trick on their liver. If they swallow that BHB, if they swallow those exogenous ketones, there's a signal that goes into the liver. It's a trick, meaning you wouldn't make these unless you were in a place of really low resources for food. And your ancestors couldn't make these ketones unless it's been a while since you've had a harvest. It's you're not in famine mode, but you're headed there like, oh, there's not as much food around as there used to be. So when ketones start to circulate in a person's body, the liver starts to say, uh-oh, we missed the memo somewhere. The resources are low. We need to make more ketones. So by swallowing ketones for the week while they prep or they start to lower those carbohydrates, I've seen tons of success where they said, all right, I didn't realize an apple has 16 carbohydrates in it. I'm like, yeah, you're probably not going to be eating the apple. I didn't realize that a plate of broccoli was going to have, going to surrender half of my carbs for the day. Right. Yeah, that broccoli is not bad, but probably not going to be eating that if you're going to stick to that 20 total carbohydrates per day. And so they realized it's, a few spoonfuls of cream spinach or something. The rest of it is eggs with extra yolks and some bacon, some brisket, maybe some hot dogs dipped in mayonnaise, meaning it's high fat, high protein, but those carbohydrates less than 20 removes a lot of, there's no fruit when they're doing that. They'll go over 20 when they use that. Even the vegetables have to be really delicately selected. Like, pay attention, you'll go right over it. And as they're figuring that out, if ketones are doing what they're supposed to do, by day 4, they're feeling like they can lower it further. They can get to that 20. They can cut out that final something that shouldn't be on the menu. And then they come back and say, wow, okay, I'm doing it. And I feel a little lightheaded because they've usually lowered their blood pressure, probably the blood pressure they didn't even know was elevated. But you start changing the way that chemical equation is in the blood, and the kidneys pee out more fluid, and you do not retain as much fluid in the circulation. And the best thing that happens in the first week of a ketogenic diet is a lowered blood pressure. But we see step 1, they are sleeping better, they feel better, and that's the first 10 days that I've pushed that button hundreds of times and said, you go first. Here's the first 2 steps. I'll tell you what to do next.
All right. So ketones are coming into circulation. Is it around day 4 that they'll start producing their own?
Right. So if you're sipping on them, that's about the time it takes for that signal. Like, the liver shouldn't be seeing them. You haven't really changed the diet enough to make them. And most of these folks are so insulin resistant, Jesse. They've been making extra insulin for over a decade. So the amount of restriction that they're going to have to go through to make their own is, I've seen 15 days of, they're trying to do it their way. They're not listening to me. They're saying, I'm eating high protein. Okay. But you're going to have a hell of a time making ketones, because essentially the only way that insulin resistant patient can make ketones is to swallow the fat. And then the only access they have to that fat is before insulin tucks it into a place of storage. So they swallow this high fat diet and they're like, oh my gosh, it's leaving an oily slick on my teeth. I don't like this feeling, because their body is not ready for that much fat. But here's how you get there: as you keep going, and they swallow it, they take it in, and they can make ketones out of the fat that they are consuming before insulin puts it in storage, before that hormone wins. And each day they do a little more. They have a little better. That insulin's a little lower. The other trick of that is, if they swallowed ketones, you can outsmart it a little. You can get there faster. And when you are saying, hey, we're not putting in as many carbohydrates, you don't have access to glucose either. So we're dropping their glucose, but their body hasn't started to make ketones. Oh man, they hate me. Like, this sucks. I'm not doing that. Take your diet and go somewhere else. Like, no, if you can give me 2 or 3 days of sipping on those ketones, by the 4th day, their mitochondria in their liver are making ketones. And now that high fat, high protein, low carbohydrate menu really puts them into a peak ketosis they don't have that transition. They don't have that yucky feeling. And I wish I would have known that 10 years ago, because there's a lot of patients who said, I can't do it. I'm like, I should have helped them a little better.
Let's hone in on insulin. So as we're going through this process, insulin's going to naturally come down. Let's talk about why it's such a bad guy in the full picture here when it comes to weight gain and chronic disease?
So the first part is insulin is a dictator for resources of food. It says you ate too much, okay? You consumed too much. And as our ancestors are thankfully wired to take that extra resource and put it away for a time where you don't have as much. That's what insulin did. It stores it, it insulates you. So when you've consumed more than your body needed, which is going to happen to everybody, insulin tucks it away, puts the first storage in your liver, just tuck it over there till I need it, and I'll get it right out of there as quickly as you need it back. So very easy in and outdoor for storing some of that glucose into the liver. But if that liver gets full and you've got the glucose all stored, now it's going to string some of those sugars into a much more long-term storage called fat. It'll make triglycerides out of that excess amounts of blood sugar. And insulin also stimulates that, says, okay, we're out of storage for the easy stuff. We're now going to go into long-term storage, which is fat. And it'll put some of that fat in the liver, but it puts a lot of it in your fat cells, in your adipose cells. And all of that is absolutely how we're designed. But there should be a place where you undo it. And in our world of abundance and easy access to food and never going a few hours without food, the indoor, putting the storages in is overused, and they just do not allow that to come out. But what else is happening when the insulin is constantly made is insulin, it grows things. And it certainly grows those fat cells. You'll stretch them to capacity, and then you might even be saying, okay, now make me some more fat cells. But it also grows things like an inflammatory response, like a cytokine or a signal that will start to grow things like skin tags, or it will turn over the layers of skin quickly, and you'll find some creases in their antecubital area or the back of their neck. This is the danger that you can see insulin resistance across the room, which is you're growing stuff you shouldn't be growing. Yes, insulin makes you fat, but it also grows things like skin tags and this overgrowth of skin on top of things like, that cancer growth does a little better when you give it insulin, especially extra insulin. There are several cancers that we know clearly linked to that chronic state of making a little bit too much insulin for a decade. So it wasn't a massive, knock on the door, you got a problem. It's this little sneaky thing that you're just making a little extra insulin, and then it's more, and then you got that little, notch in your belt that went up, and then your brain's not like processing as fast. All of that was debris being put into the body, not being swept out, and a stimulus of a growing pattern that grows the chronic disease.
Okay, so we have weight gain, skin changes. You mentioned changes with our processing of the brain. What other symptoms can somebody look for if they think they might be headed into this territory we've been talking about?
Insulin resistance, yeah. Honestly, they cannot go very long without food. That because that insulin is so high, it's using the glucose that's in circulation. And then as soon as that glucose dips down a little bit, whether your body stored it in storage or you used it as energy, they get hungry. And that sugar goes up and down and up and down. And that is the most dangerous part of why insulin resistance constantly grows is you ask the patient, why do you eat so much? Why do you eat so often? They'll tell you, I feel hungry. And they do. That insulin will do that. When you're looking for symptoms of, let's just take a teenager, they should not have insulin resistance, but it is rampant all over that age group, that generation. And by right after puberty, it wasn't just, a few extra pounds of pudge to get you through the growth hormone. These teenagers have 50, 60 pounds of fat mass on them. And it came from excess insulin. And you watch them in the wild and say there's food in front of them. Dang, they want to eat every 2 hours. And society feeds it to them. I think that's probably the most common symptom that doesn't get recognized. And When you ask an insulin resistant patient to say, well, just go on a low fat diet, just stop doing that. Oh, that insulin hormone is going to make your life hell. It will keep you hungry. It's only going to give you a tiny little bit of resource, and then it's going to, protect itself, saying, no, this is for when you're really hungry, when you're really starved, and your blood sugar is still a little too high. We're not going to let that out of the storage bin, which is why, the off ramp for this nightmare of a cycle is just use a different fuel. Just go to the fat as your fuel instead of those carbohydrates. And then insulin it's not obsolete, but it's just downgraded as the hormone of importance when they're on a ketogenic state.
Well, let's take it to the blood vessels. Somebody who is spiking blood glucose, like you talked about earlier, you're going to have that response plus the increase in insulin that follows it. Heart disease, number one killer right now. Let's connect this together.
Right. So you put that blood, let's just stay with those little red blood cells in circulation. And when they are constantly around extra sugar, those red blood cells inside the blood vessels get sticky. We call it glycated. The glucose gets stuck to the little hemoglobins, and that's called a glycated hemoglobin A1C, which is a average measurement. It's a math equation of how much is your blood sugar. And that's not the only thing getting sticky. The walls of the artery are getting sticky. The little lining that goes down the artery walls, like a Teflon protector, it's called a glycocalyx. And when sugars touch that over and over again, the glycocalyx goes from this beautiful, lovely carpet protecting your blood vessels to a carpet like in a a fraternity house, like it's just mashed and full of traffic and beer and whatever else goes into a fraternity carpet, meaning it's not doing a good job. It's not protecting those walls anymore. And as that glycocalyx gets destroyed, the chronic presence of insulin also made it difficult for you to make that glycocalyx. So now you've got one-two punch. The sugar going into the body caused it to get sticky, and the protectors can't grow because of that signal from an insulin state, which doesn't let you repair at the rate you used to. This leads to the cholesterol that should be being recycled back into your liver. Well, it just can't get back into the liver. The liver's full, and it's not got as many receptors recycling that cholesterol. So the cholesterol says, well, no problem. I'll just go park over here. And it sneaks out of that blood vessel and hangs out in the wall of that artery. Boy, that's where the beginning of the end. I mean, it gets calcified. The body says, you do not belong here. Get that cholesterol back to the liver. What are you doing in my space? And the white blood cells will try to phagocytize it. It'll try to eat it up and, move it into the right spot. But it can only handle a tiny amount of that. And the longer those folks spend with high blood sugars, high insulin, and then the cholesterol, which is an incredibly important resource for our brains and bodies, well, it can't get to where it's going. And now you're parking it in one of the worst places, which is an artery wall.
Let's come back to our hypothetical patient here. 20 grams of total carbs per day. Let's hone in on the other two macros. Early on, what that looks like, because obviously if we're bringing the carbs down, we're going to need to up the other two, or at least one of them. And then over time, does that change as somebody's getting more metabolically healthy and beyond?
Yeah, you nailed it. Absolutely. That first season, I mean, why I don't say how many grams of fat should you have or how many grams of protein should you have. I'm like, you'll see me avoid that answer like the plague. I'll tell you how many carbohydrates to eat, but the other percentages really depend on how well your body is responding to this. How insulin resistant is that 40-year-old? I don't know. I'll be able to tell you in a week by looking at what is this morning fasting glucose and what are those morning fasting blood ketone levels. We know that there's some rules that are easy to follow at the beginning. When an insulin resistant patient comes in and they have not done this, or maybe they've been on it before but haven't in recent weeks, we say, all right, drop those carbs to 20 total per day. And we want you eating mostly fat, like 80% of this, calories, weight, whatever way you're measuring your food needs to be fat. So it's why it's just counterculture. People that are fearful of fat are like, oh my word, you're nuts. There's a tinfoil hat on this lady. Like, no, no, no. In order for you to get this benefit, I need you to change the chemistry or the hormone that you can't see, which is insulin. And so we tell them we want high fat for breakfast. We want more egg yolks than whites, and we want you dipping the bacon in the egg yolk. No toast, but that amount of fat in the morning is really important. And if you do calculate it out, it's at least 80% is fat. You're like, oh my goodness, that sounds so unhealthy. And indeed, that's not where you stay forever. But in order to keep those ketones in circulation, we're going to get you to 2 or 3 weeks until I can predict that your hormones that are built from fat are helping you again. And I think that's one of the most beautiful moments in helping these patients with this is when they come in, that man who's 40 years old and doesn't, he's had insulin resistance, he doesn't have access to the amount of testosterone his body's making. He doesn't have access to the vitamin D that he has in his body. It's tucked in fat cells. Insulin dictated over any fatty molecule. And that means he sacrifices the testosterone and the vitamin D and many other things. But those two are easy examples to saying, well, I can help you more if you have those essential hormones working for you instead of, storing them in your armpit. Let's get them back in your circulation. Okay, doc, how do I do that? You got to lower the insulin. That means you got to have fat in circulation. So as we put them and say, all right, I want you to keep eating fat until you accidentally miss a meal. You're like, what? I never miss a meal. I'm like, I know that's what's been happening. But one measurement for me to know, are you fat adapted, which means we now can see fat get from one end organ to the next. We can produce this hormone and it delivers to the cell. It activates that nucleus. Proteins are made by that cell because it's working correctly. Whereas before, like 90% of it wasn't getting where it was supposed to go. When they have lowered that insulin and they have circulated fat, they feel better. Their brain is better. They sleep better. Their immune system is working better. And this can happen all in the course of 14 days. And then they'll do this weird thing where they miss a meal. They're busy and the sugars aren't going up and down anymore. They're stable. Now they may be too high, but they're stable. And it's that volatility, that up and down of your blood sugar that was keeping them eating every 2 hours. And they'll be like, I thought that was for weirdos. Whoever misses a meal, not me. And of course you can't miss a meal without those fat-based hormones on your side. And it's a great moment. You can help patients when they feel good. 25 years of seeing patients, the first 15, I wrote more prescriptions for high fiber and exercise and Metamucil. I mean, all the things that no longer, and the patients felt terrible. They'd come in saying, my depression's not any better. I just can't get my brain to stay sleeping. I feel like I'm just old. And they're not old, but their bodies were acting that way. And within 14 days of just shutting down those carbs, really pushing them into a ketogenic state. And again, not losing them in the first 3 days, meaning if they have to fight insulin all on their own and they're severely insulin resistant, getting those ketones in circulation this isn't forever. It's to get you to the part where your body is doing it on its own. And I've just found great success with, all right, you're going to feel better on your own without any supplements in about 14 days.
All right, let me know if I have this right. So in that first couple of weeks, insulin's coming down. In the beginning, we're going to take fat from the diet, make ketones out of that. As the insulin comes down, we're going to be able to release our body fat and make ketones out of that, say, a couple weeks into this and beyond. Hence, in the beginning, it would be more important to have more fat to provide that substrate to make ketones.
Right. Chemistry, those hormones have to fix first. That insulin is too powerful. You won't win. I mean, look at the last 4 years of the use of Ozempic or the tirzepatide or the semaglutide. Those two hormones are manipulating how your brain and your gut respond in relation to food. And you don't get such sweeping success because hormones suck. They are amazing at how they help people say, something's different. I don't want to eat so much. And I'm saying lead with that. I mean, quit making the one that's keeping your hunger going. It's feeding that insulation process, that storage process. And in the same breath, those hormones that everybody else is paying $500 a month to inject, your brain and body will respond to them and make them again when you stop circulating so much insulin. And but you have to lead with manipulating those hormones. Or the white knuckling it, they fail, Jesse. They just fail. They will do a great job. It's like asking somebody to stop drinking booze and not recognize that there's probably more reasons for drinking booze than just making you relax at the end of the day. There's something to this that I need you to work on if you want to stay sober. If you're going to try to stay out of the lane of carb rescuing, using that carbohydrate in ways that is from way more than nutrition, way too often, hormones are first. You have to reduce the insulin. That's
in that
fat.
first couple of weeks, as we're lowering the insulin and transitioning to this diet, is any of the fat being released from the body at that point? And are we going to experience some fat loss? So yeah, explain that, because the way I explained it there, where we're taking in the fat and making ketones, it almost made it seem like we're not going to burn any fat or make any ketones from our fat during that period. So talk about the nuance there.
Right. Again, the hormone is what released it. So by putting that fat in, what you were doing was you were lowering the carbohydrates. Now, if you lower the carbohydrates without eating any fat, this same thing would happen, but about 3 weeks into the process. And that is a long time to go hungry. So what you do by putting fat at the beginning of the story is the patient feels better. They stick with it. They feel better. But when you have ketones in circulation, those ketones are made in your liver, and they send out a message that I need more. I need you to get me some fat, supply me with the little substrate that I make ketones from. And that's a string of fat. So the way that fat cell opened up was, number one, you had to lower insulin. And number two, you had to have a ketone present. So by the presence of ketones, now you're on that day 3, 4, and 5, and you'll start to watch the number of fat cells say, oh, I know this game. We have a whole bunch of stuff stored for you and ready that they could not release until those two things happened. The insulin went down and the ketones were in circulation. And then it's a snowball. It's a snowball to say, okay, we're going to keep that in supply. We're going to increase that energy production. And that's what happens. That's where the replenishment of those fat-based hormones starts to be, measurable within that 14 days and almost miraculous by 6 weeks. Like, wow, look at their vitamin D. Without increasing the vitamin D that they're taking. Again, vitamin D is essential. Your body cannot make it. You must consume it, either the sun or your foods. And you look at a ketogenic diet, and they're not taking any supplements. They are just a ketogenic diet. And that vitamin D level will rise because it is being mobilized out of the storage in their fat. And it was there all along, hidden behind too much insulin for that patient. And boy, they feel great at 6 weeks.
How long will that vitamin D continue to be released?
Depends on how long. You want to keep the fat cells open, right? So it followed the rules of any other molecule. It went into fat storage at the same rate that the fat did, and as long as you weren't severely depreciated of it during that season of your life. So I had a patient measure this. Comes in, this is the second or third time they're doing the ketogenic diet. And they're like, okay, this time I'm going to follow your rules. And I'm like, I give them a kit where they can prick their finger and check their ketones, check their vitamin D. And so they check it every week for those 6 weeks. And the first 2 weeks, not much change. That third week, exponentially higher after that. We stopped at 6 weeks, and it was, they started out with a vitamin D in their teens or low 20s as those first few results. It was 85 by the time that ended the 6 weeks. And I've seen folks come back with 150. They're not taking any vitamin D supplement. They're just doing their life, maybe eating some little bitty fish. But that level of vitamin D is, you are you're not eating that much. It's coming from your storage. That's where, I mean, they had a lot of fat mass to sacrifice to this experiment. So that's part of it.
And then the long tail of this, if somebody is losing weight, say for a year and a half, committed to what we're talking about, it sounds like they'll continue to release vitamin D and likely won't need to supplement through that whole period of time.
Yeah, I've seen that happen several times. And again, it's one of those great little test kits that's at home. Test it. I mean, I wouldn't want to guess on my own vitamin D, but I mean, and I learned this because patients did this with me. Like, wow, I wasn't expecting it to be that robust for this long. But they have to stay in a ketogenic state. I think that's the hard part. This is the holiday when they come in, they lower the carbs. I mean, they're making bushels of ketones those first couple of weeks. Their body's almost over compensating, not going to live without a resource. But then you get to that steady state where you're like, okay, this is where it gets harder. You're now at 20 total carbs. Why aren't you making any more ketones? Well, your body has found a steady state. It doesn't like to make energy or mobilize energy that you're not going to use. The human body does not waste energy on purpose. It wastes it to survive. So that first wave of ketones, it did like, oh, you changed the hormone, you win. This is absolutely right. But that weight loss will stall unless you decrease the insulin yet again. And that's where the 6-week to 6-year story is several plateaus that we got to dial in and say, all right, you gotta outsmart your body. Let me show you how to do that.
Okay, so we have vitamin D. Was it other hormones that are trapped in the fat that get released as well?
Yeah, think of all the ones that are made from the base of cholesterol. So those are your sex hormones. That's progestin, estradiol, testosterone, and then the vitamin D are the core ones. You've got cortisol that's in there as well. You don't need to make any more of that usually, but so you're seeing more of those essential and sex-based hormones rise on that first season of a ketogenic diet.
All right, I want to give a different hypothetical situation to understand the physiology here. Somebody who is new to this, like we've been talking about, they're having a lot of fat. They're in that period of time now where they're producing their own ketones. How much of that'll be from the fat through the diet versus fat on the body versus somebody like you who's still eating high fat, you're keto, but you're metabolically healthy.
Right.
Talk about the difference there.
So you're trying to measure, how much how much of the fat is coming off in a let's just say, give it a 2-year process. And I've got a very good example. As I do a body scan every year to measure what is my visceral fat, what is my subcutaneous fat, what's my body mass. And I'm teaching this, right? I'm supposed to be the perfect expert. But I'm in a ketogenic state. I do a fast every week of somewhere between 60 and 72 hours. And I wake up in the morning, most mornings, with a blood sugar in that 80s to 90s. And then a ketone that was great at the beginning, but then it's 0.5, 0.6, just barely on the edge. And my body mass didn't change for those 3 years, but the amount of fat that I was putting on my body did change. And it's a very good example of saying, all right, this one lever that worked really well for me was get into a ketogenic state. You can't believe how much better your brain works. You can't believe how much better your energy works. And then just hold still. Be just enough keto to keep that energy flowing. And it did work. I felt great. But as soon as I would eat a little more than my body was burning, I would store it. And that's where that, the fat around my organs, that visceral fat, is what was getting worse. And the fat around my hips was getting worse. So what happened there? Oh, I pushed one lever, the one that I was able to manipulate. I liked nothing burger the best, meaning as soon as I would start to eat a little bit, then it was, I can have a little more. I just a bite. And I mean, I was breaking my own rules. Like, I was insulin resistant. Any woman who's carried babies to term, by definition, has been insulin resistant. And then there was life. I was, not exercising, and I was doing what every other 40-year-old did, which was put on weight. And then I got on the ketogenic diet and I lost some of it. And now the weight's not doing what I wanted to. It's only a couple pounds a year. But you're like, huh. So the one lever that I was able to do really well was nothing burger, meaning I fasted for those 3 days. But my body held a steady state. And I was doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, which was a couple of bites of something at night. A tradition in my family of origin that wasn't a sin. We were farmers, and you worked your tail off, and if you had a little something at night, then it was a bowl of ice cream. That's not on the menu now, but even just a few bites of meat, of ketogenic foods, and my body made a bunch of insulin for that, and I stored it. So now you go 2 years later and say, what am I going to do to fix this? Well, unfortunately, God landed a hurricane on my home, and 2 foot of water swept through this house that we'd only owned for about a year, and it took away my kitchen. And maybe I'm cheap and stubborn. That we were going to live in this house while we repaired it, because what else are you going to do? But I didn't have any way to snack at night, and I was not going to eat out. That was a non-negotiable. So he took away my kitchen at night. Guess how many pounds of weight I lost when I fixed that one habit?
I've heard you talk about this. 15?
Yes, it's 15 pounds. That's a lot. And it was all that mess. So what lever was I pulling there? That's called time-restricted eating. Okay. And when you look at the time-restricted eating that is the most damaging on patients with insulin resistance, the weight or the impact on your insulin for food after sunset is 10 times more impactful than if you had that bite before noon. So when I learned that I could eat my sardines in the morning, because you don't need a refrigerator for sardines, and then maybe I'd have a boiled egg in the middle of the afternoon, and then I would not eat at night. I just said, okay, I need to fix this habit anyway. Makes it really easy when there's no temptation. And it took about 3 or 4 weeks before, geez, those ketones in the morning aren't 0.5 anymore. They're 1.2. They're 0.9. They're almost twice as high as they had been because of that. Because I kept pushing the insulin button in the evening hours, and it wasn't a lot. And I wouldn't be, I wasn't shameful of the amount that I was like, oh, it's nothing. I'm fine. I feel great. But that insulin will help you store. So now you got 2 levers. You have the nothing burger. That was the fasting that I would do. And I like that. It's very, helps my spiritual growth. I usually pray for somebody in those 3 days. But I do better with nothing. As soon as I started eating is when I have the problem. And then to say, all right, sunset means no food. Stop that. And 15 pounds later, much better. Now there's other levers that are also helpful, but those 2 are time-restricted eating, where you move that eating window towards sunrise, and that you also give myself to undo. I need at least 36 hours to watch those ketones start to pump. 48 hours gets even better. If I can make it to 72, it's a really robust reset, Jesse. Something that I have patients use all the time, but I was too healthy for that. I was fine.
Well, while we're in it here, it's great you shared all that. What are some of the other levers people can use?
I love making fresh mitochondria. So there's this thing that you do with your brain where when you look at somebody, you see health, you see illness. Now, all of us do this as humans. There's this great study out of Stanford that was trying to measure telomere length. Your audience knows what telomeres are.
Go over quickly. Some will, I do.
So, right. If DNA is like a shoestring, those little eyelets at the end of the shoestring, that plastic part, that's your telomere. And in life, the telomere gets shorter to the point where it then starts to unravel, and it really is a reflection of poor health. So there's lots of things we know that are really important for telomere length, like don't drink a bunch of booze, make sure you sleep all the way through it, don't be overweight, don't, they're like health markers. You're like, okay, all right, antioxidants are good, and being lean and healthy, okay. But there's this thing your brain does where when the Stanford folks were saying, how do we measure telomere length? It turns out one of the best ways to assess it was snapshot the patient and let them look at them and have them grade their health. And our brain does this thing that ages them. And that was more accurate than all of the ways they were measuring these telomere lengths, this snapshot that says, just trust yourself. Are they healthy? And, 25 years of seeing patients and then having the cross check to look at their labs, I'm good at this. That mitochondrial health is what they're looking for. That's what's really there. And when your mitochondria, which are those little powerhouses that take the fat or they take the glucose and they turn it into energy. I mean, why was I feeling good despite having extra 15 pounds? My mitochondria were burning fat and they did it well. And I felt I had energy. But the mitochondria needed to be grown a little. And so there is, my favorite way to do this is zone 2 training. And I can't remember. Last time we talked, did you say that you do CrossFit?
No, I don't. I know about it, but it's not been my thing now. What about you?
Well, so I have 3 sons, and when I found CrossFit, I thought, oh, this is a great way for them to imprint off of these other people in the room for good form and a good coach for teaching them for weightlifting. So I started CrossFitting when my kids hit young teenage years, and I just adopted these other men as their dad does not lift weights, at least that season he didn't. And it was great. So we'd go to CrossFit, but man, 3 pull-ups in and I'm sweating like a dog. My heart rate's way too high, but I don't care. I'm doing the workout with my kids and I enjoyed it. And so when I learned about this thing, zone 2 training, and specifically that if you want to grow mitochondria, you should hang out in this zone 2 training. So I get one of those Apple Watches and I look at it and I was like, all right, so the calculation says that when I get a little breathless, when I break a sweat is when zone 2 happens. And I'm like, oh Lord, I hopped right over zone 2 into 3, 4, and 5, which means my heart rate was going really high. I'm sweating like a dog. And if you wanted me to stay in zone 2, it was really boring. I'm like, oh, this sucks. I'm not doing this. There's no way I would have to just walk fast. Oh, I hated it. Just uncomfortable. No way. You're in zone 2 when you can't quite, you can talk, you just don't want to, and you're sweating. So I'm looking for another way out, saying, all right, I'm going to use a sauna. And actually, I think Peter Attia was saying, no, he likes to hang out in zone 2 with his ruck. I'm like, I'm not doing this. But he goes, but the other good option is a sauna. And so I said, all right, let's look into this. Turns out, if you can spend 120 minutes a week in zone 2, it is a 25% all-cause mortality reduction. It reduces the death by 25%. That's way better than any workout plan if you can stay in zone 2 for 120 minutes a week. So I get in my sauna. I put my Apple Watch on. I have one of those pop-up ones, so I cover a towel on my head and stay in it till my heart rate hits hits zone 2. And then my goal is to stay in there for 20 minutes. I don't hit 120 minutes a week, but I do hit it a few times a week. And it's a really great hack that I know one of the reasons that I just sit through the uncomfortableness, listen to a podcast or do whatever it is I'm doing, is that I'm growing mitochondria. And dang, Jesse, it's almost as powerful of a lever for me as fasting has been. That I like it. It's just a tiny amount of time commitment. I think the sauna that, is at the house, it's in my routine. It's not, too cost prohibitive, or it's not, 3 hours to heat it up to the part. It's 7 minutes and I'm in zone 2. So I could make a routine out of it. And boy, that's where the literature is really fun.
All right. So the idea here, upgrading the mitochondria, you can do it through zone 2 exercise or getting there through a sauna.
Yep.
The idea here is that the mitochondria are going to process the energy, whether it be the sugars or the ketones.
Right.
Isn't it true that ketogenesis actually hacks the mitochondria and upgrades them in and of itself?
That mitophagy, right? So yeah, autophagy is that word where it says, all right, when that glucose went down and the ketones went up, there's this tipping point in everybody's chemistry, in everybody's body, that says, all right, we're looking for resources, meaning we think there's a famine coming. And that triggers the body to say, all right, clean up all the trash, because some of those proteins that we put between, that the earwax on the left side or the brain, hippocampus on the right side, we just stuffed them in a corner because we didn't need them. but let's recycle those. Let's take those proteins and put them back into action. And that happens at this moment, this change in resources. Glucose goes down, ketones go up. And the other thing that gets triggered is as you're feeding those strings of fat to the mitochondria, your body your mitochondria get a grade. Are they leaky or are they doing a good job? And if they're leaking that resources, it'll send that little vibration to the neighbor and saying, I'm going to implode and then I'm going to birth two more. So that's that mitochondrial turnover, mitophagy. So it says, yep, I'm not doing as good as my neighbor. And it is a relative measurement, we think, that somebody can have a just trashed mitochondria. So it's the weakest of the weakest that are trying to overcome first. But then the healthier you get, if you're the weakest one, then even that 60%er, which would have been the highest one in your old self, now will replace and you upgrade even faster and quicker. And that is youth. That is longevity. That is health. I mean, in a nutshell.
All right, well, let's stick on mitochondria. What about other supplements, different hacks that we can use to upgrade them in a similar way?
Yeah, I start with that little metal. Mitochondria is dependent on the metal called magnesium. And everybody's low on this. I mean, again, go back to our ancestors 1,000 years ago saying, guess what? Your magnesium, this should be consumed in the foods that we eat. But our soil and even our beef, any place we get magnesium is so depleted that, the list of symptoms that magnesium, you point in the direction, I'm like, it's magnesium until proven otherwise. Especially that low energy, that poor sleep, that mitochondria cannot do its job. It cannot, think of magnesium as a spark plug. It's the plug that gets the spark to go and make that mitochondria do its job. And without proper magnesium, it just can't do it. It cannot turn that fuel into energy. And I have a few things where I don't spend money on checking their magnesium anymore. I mean, it is such a symptom-based profile that don't waste your time and your money having me be some kind of, magnesium god. Google the list. And if that's you, the first place I send them is a float tank. So, what's really actually, I had a few patients do this, is they go into ChatGPT and say, what's the closest magnesium float near me? And Google and ChatGPT does a pretty good job of finding it. And better than anything else we found. Have you ever been to one?
Well, you actually were texting with me. I was having an issue where my legs were restless at night. Mm. I've been lowering my carbs gradually over the last 6 months, last year, and I was having an issue with this. I texted you and you told me about this. So explain what was happening in my case where that was coming on related to magnesium, and then you can bring in the float tank.
Oh, yes. So restless leg is this. Oh, it's awful. How long did you suffer with it before you texted me?
Probably a couple of months on and off.
Right. And it's a weird thing at first. You're like, if your spouse is like, I don't know, you're kicking your legs at night and they'll move them and it's like twitching, but it's also like a cramping and it'll wake them right out of sleep. It'll, bother the partner in bed. And that movement is a glitch that should not be happening. And it is almost always a nutrient deficiency of a metal. And the two top metals that cause restless leg are magnesium for the first 8 and then iron for the next 4. I mean, it's just like it is a metal missing from that person. And I vote for magnesium every time. Not that iron deficiency doesn't cause this as well, but that restless leg it'll keep their brain from sleeping. It gets them irritable. That there is discipline in, cutting 20 total carbs down. But when you sleep deprive them and they've got this twitchiness in their sleep and their legs don't feel good the next day, boy, they can't say no to that Dorito. Boom, it's in their mouth before they knew it. So watching, and we can give them medication. Like there's some very great Parkinson medication that stops the movement. But I contend that, again, that's option number 20. when the first 10 were go get the magnesium in you, I promise you, most of this is reversible. And if that's happening in your legs, I guarantee that what's happening in your brain isn't pretty. They get anxious. The thoughts will flight. And they're like, it's not like me. I don't do this. And it really, God, if you're raising kids, you're like, I'm the ADHD teenager all of a sudden. Why can I not focus? And then you say, all right, just trust me on this. Go get in a float tank. So I have folks Google, the Dead Sea. And you see, usually you can find these old-fashioned pictures of the ladies in their bathing suits and they're floating and they're hanging out in the Dead Sea. And you'll say, oh, this is this secret to life. All your problems are solved if you go to the Dead Sea and you hang out for an afternoon. And they're floating in that salt water in that Dead Sea because the salinity or the salt concentration is so dense that it displaces the human at the top of the water. And of course, it's called the Dead Sea because nothing grows in there. High magnesium is deadly to most plants and animals, so it might smell funny, but it's like, okay, this is a great tradition that shows how have we always replaced magnesium in these places, and why is there this mystical, like life just got better if you go to the Dead Sea and hang out for a week? Well, same thing happens if you schedule a float, and I say, in 21 days, get there 5 times, and what you're looking for is magnesium, that metal, can be absorbed through the skin. Now, your skin is a great protector, and there's a lot of things that do not come through the skin, but magnesium comes through the skin. And I've had patients so depleted in magnesium that when I sent them to the float, they couldn't make it all the way through the float. They had to run to the bathroom because the other place that we use magnesium in medicine is as a laxative. If you put too much down the gullet at once, I'm going to send you trotting to the toilet. And it's great if you're constipated or if, and it's used, 7-Eleven around here, you can find it at it's in the laxative aisle. But that means it went out, it did not get absorbed. When you look at really depleted patients, they won't make it 20 minutes in that float tank. Now, just listen to the lifespan of what that magnesium needed to do. The magnesium was in the water. It gets absorbed through the skin. It gets into the circulation. It goes to their GI system, and then it leaks backwards into their bowel enough to cause them to go to the bathroom. I mean, the imagery in my mind is, oh, that patient is in such trouble. I mean, if you're leaking magnesium backwards within 15 minutes of laying in that float tank, we got some work to do. And of course, I say, give me 5 hours of hanging out in that float tank over a 21-day period. And it is miraculous. There are so many things that go backward that they fix because they restore that magnesium deficiency. And, the treatment plan for restless leg, isn't cheap. They're Parkinsonian drugs that are manipulating the basal ganglial cells. And that's great if you have Parkinson's. But if you start on a Parkinsonian medicine in your mid-40s, because really you were depleted of magnesium and you just use this medicine to make you feel better, well, that's not a very good job as your physician.
Well, my legs are a lot better now.
No,
I used a combo of oral magnesium spray, and the float tank. I noticed the biggest difference with the float tank, so.
It's crazy. I mean, like the first time I heard about this, I thought, oh, this is woo-woo. But it wasn't. I was like, oh. And then I was quickly reminded by one of my OB-GYN friends that, how we get muscles to stop cramping when you're in labor is we put a magnesium drip in and that uterus will shut off. If you ever have your wife was pregnant, did she have any preterm labor?
No.
If you've ever seen preterm labor and they have to go to the hospital for an IV drip, the IV they're getting is magnesium. And my OB-GYN friends would say, yep, we discharge them from the hospital and we set the timer because it's a math formula for how long it'll take for that magnesium to either go in their bones and then slowly deplete again until that muscle starts cramping again and she goes back into preterm labor.
Do you find when you're working with people that it's usually people that are bringing the carbs down early on in the journey that experience this, or if they're dropping them down significantly, again, say by another, 100 grams, if they're only doing this in blocks, when they're really making those drops, is that when this happens?
Yeah, it's the diuresis that's associated with a ketogenic state. So if they drop their carbs from, let's say, 200 to 100, but that wasn't enough to lower the insulin to cause a diuresis. Diuresis means an increased blood supply goes through the kidney and you offload that into your urine. So they pee more. That, kind of think of it as wringing out the body with the excess inflammation, which is what you want. That's part of why a ketogenic diet is so linked to a healthier life. But if they drop that carbs from 200 to 100 and the blood supply to the kidney doesn't change much, well, you lose the magnesium with the increased blood supply, with the increased filtration through the kidney. So when I go from 100 to 20 and they are in a strong ketogenic state, I'm like, put some magnesium in or you're not going to like me very much. You have to replace the magnesium. When I fast, magnesium is something I try to take most days. And on my fasting days, I'll just take 2 because that's how you stay out of the ditch. If I go through a season of not doing that, my feet will cramp in the middle of the night. And you're like, oh, shoot, I'm human and I got to follow my own rules.
Do you find for yourself or somebody that's been through the salt baths that when they want to just maintain after that point, they can do it orally?
Yeah, the oral, here's how I try to equate it too is like one of the best absorption ones is that L-theanine, also getting past that blood-brain barrier, so really good penetration to the tissues, the end organ tissues. But I tell them it's like a float tank is worth like 2 bottles of that L-theanine. So it's a lot. You get a lot put in the body with that. So that's why I say, just trust me on this. 5 over 21 days gets you so far away from the edge. When they're cramping, when they have restless leg, I'll get them a little better. Then they'll go on with their life and say, no, you got to keep magnesium in your body. When we get 5 floats, at least I get them some grace where you can say, all right, now let's get you something that doesn't make you go diarrhea. And L-theanine is not cheap. So the supplements are also part of it. When I look at oral replacement, I almost discourage it as the way to get health, to get that back in your system, because they're like 6 bottles of that away before they really get to a safe place that they're not having most days of the week. Why is your brain doing that? Why is that concentration off? Why does that depression haunt them? Why is that anxiety? All of these symptoms, I want to just write them off as magnesium. And it is true. Most of them are improved when that's replaced. So I'm like, just quit farting around. Go get the magnesium replaced. And then we can look truly at what your symptoms are that are left. So the maintenance of it, yeah, take a supplement, but don't do it until you really see those symptoms improve with enough soaks in that magnesium. Absolutely.
All right, I want to come back to our hypothetical patient we opened up with. And you kept pushing me into refining the details. And we got down to a man in his 40s. I just want to come back to that for the females here. What would be different if you're working with a female early on from what you shared there?
With the females, they're more insulin resistant. They I did this video on YouTube where I compared the world of Alone. Have you ever watched that documentary or that the reality show is what it is? They drop these people off in the middle of nowhere, and whoever lives the longest alone wins the show, right? And if you want to see an example of how weight loss for women is just not fair, that's what I covered on that. Like their mitochondria are different. They hold on to fat so stinking long. It is just not fair. So evolutionarily, you're going to survive the famine, ladies. You're going to be better off. You should have won the Alone. I think recently, like season 15 or 16, a woman finally won this Alone series. But when you look at women's insulin resistance, and they're coming to us to reverse it, I tell women, you got to be the girl here. You're going to have to be the one who plots and documents. I need you checking your ketones in the morning. What you need to do to get success is possible. Men just fall on themselves and get into a ketogenic state. They follow these rules and their mitochondria are different. The way they store fat is different. In a woman's setting, that insulin resistance is just, it's hardier. And I can show you how to do it, but you got to use real data to get out of that ditch. I'm the perfect example for that too, where I followed all the rules and then I stopped, I checked just enough and I'd check when I was fasting. But what was happening during those off seasons is, I, I would do good enough. I would do what worked before. And what had happened is the production of ketones will slump and you'll go back to storing fat. And so you see many women, and they have gone to the doctor and said things like, I'm doing everything right. I feel this pain right now as I'm telling you this story because I can think of a couple of women from my recent 21-day class, which is 21 days of an intense ketogenic diet. And there's a lot of women in there because I'm like, I will show you the rules. You're going to be in a group of other women who have failed, who everything didn't work. And I hear these stories where they would go into the doctor saying, no, you don't get it. I eat one meal. It's some lettuce and blah, blah, and whatever they were eating. They did it for like 6 months. They measured every stinking morsel. And all they did was turn down that basal energy expenditure to the point where their brains turned off. They feel like crap. And the doctor thinks they're lying. I've been that doctor. I've been like, there's no way you could do that. There's no way you could eat that little for that long. You must be, and I am ashamed of that. But it feels impossible when that woman gets insulin resistant that, you have to follow the hormones in this woman. And the way you follow the hormones is you look at the morning fasting glucose and the morning fasting ketones. And the formula isn't awful, but as soon as you take your eye off of the data, you're going to start putting weight back on. You have to have a menu. And that's why you don't see me say, how many grams of fat do you eat? How many grams of protein? No. I need you in ketosis in the morning. That is so paramount, especially for the women that have put on this weight. And as they go through menopause, we talked about vitamin D not having access. When women in their 40s are, revving up the insulin resistance, because that's how we're designed. That's part of what happens with excess. They go into early menopause. And then their brain does even weirder things. Like, I wish it was easy, but it's not. It's a bunch of volatility for those sex-based hormones. Now you've got insulin mucking with those things as well. And they feel terrible. So women, it's just harder. I'm sorry. I'm with you.
You've made it clear a few times today. You like the ketones and the glucose measured first thing in the morning. There's something called the dawn phenomenon where we have hormones spike in the morning, starting during the night, including cortisol, bringing blood glucose up. Naturally, we're going to have a higher blood glucose in the morning, and that's going to impact ketones. Why do you like to take your measurement at that time?
Yes, because that dawn phenomenon, I'll take a guess, Jesse. How much do you think it would impact the blood sugar in a healthy person?
In a healthy person, I'm guessing 10 points.
Yeah, maybe 5. It's a very slight difference. It's your blood sugar should be flat stable. In fact, throughout the night, it should be sinking a little lower, a little lower, a little lower. And by the time you wake up in the morning, it should be 70 to 85, even with the dawn phenomenon. And you should have recruited resources out of storage because it's been 12 hours since you've eaten. You used up the stored glucose. Now get to that long-term storage emptying. That's how you stay lean. That's how, what was happening when my not so skinny self, the prior 15 pounds, it wasn't that there was I just didn't tap into any fat resources while sleeping because I would spike insulin too late in the day. One bite of food. That's what did it. Super unfair. But that morning fasting number is looking at your metabolism. I have folks get those continuous glucose monitors, and I'm kind of a stickler about them getting a G7, the one you need a prescription for, because you can calibrate it. And when that calibration, is when you have an accurate number, and that morning fasting blood sugar, when it only gets to 95 in the morning, you got problems. That's not normal. Yes, you're healthier than most of the people that you're going to have supper with, but that's not normal. Normal is to get that decreased enough glucose that you emptied fat storage, which is where the ketones should be raising in the morning. So I hear all the time, that's impossible. I cannot get my ketones to go up in the morning. That's impossible. I'm like, no, you're just sicker than you think you are. You have to stop that eating even sooner in the previous day. You have to have a nothing burger for 36 hours once a week or something. We got to find the lever that pushes your metabolism back to the normal zone. And folks give all this credit to the dawn phenomenon. I'm like, no, it's not that sexy. It's a little bit. And when you're ill, when you're insulin resistant, yeah, there's a whole bunch of that going on. And your ketones go to pot. They're 0.3 in the morning. They're hardly measurable. And you're not going to lose any weight.
So what it sounds like you're saying is you like the fact that we need to push through that, because a lot of times if we're measuring later in the day without that, it might be falsely looking good.
Yes.
And if we're still being affected by the dawn phenomenon, which you want us to check at that time, it's a sign we're still metabolically sick.
Exactly. I mean, you can make those numbers look really sexy. I mean, it's not an accident that I check my numbers on my live YouTube show once a week at 4:00 in the afternoon. Like, my numbers are going to look great. I'm busy. I don't eat during the day, especially, I'm fasted now. And it's not, as long as I sleep, my numbers are going to be good. When you're really trying to say, all right, here's the rules for looking at yourself. Again, your physician is never going to care this much. They're not going to study you this much. You have to study you this much. And when you wake up in the morning and those blood sugars are triple digits, we're in trouble. When you can't make a ketone in the first thing in the morning, you need to pull on a lever somewhere in that footprint for how you're choosing to keep those mitochondria healthy. Whether that's the sauna needs to happen more often, the last bite of food needs to be earlier in the afternoon. The fat content sometimes needs to be higher. Like I need to go back to the beginning, because your insulin resistance has led to this trickle of ketones, and we need to jumpstart things again by saying, remember that trick where you put ketones in circulation and then the liver goes, wow, we're making ketones. I must have missed the memo. I'm going to make some ketones. Ketones beget ketones, and then they can wave into it. It's one of the reasons why I did not mean to get internet famous about teaching people how to use sardines, but it's a brilliant trick. If the nothing burger is hard, and I contend most of my insulin resistant patients are going to get a better return on their investment. And I mean the investment of pain, like you're eating sardines or nothing. But you're going to get a higher return of improving your metabolism with a 72-hour sardine challenge than you are of a water fast for most of my severely insulin-resistant patients.
Okay, by the sounds of it, for somebody that's not seeing ketones in the morning and their blood glucose is a little higher, you like to stimulate the metabolism. The other option would be for somebody who is just getting metabolically healthy slower over time, to do a lot of what we're saying here and then wait for the metabolism to get healthier.
Yes.
How do you look at those two, where it's somebody sick and they're progressing, but they're being affected, say, by the dawn effect in the morning? How do you know when to step on the gas and to give them more stimulation versus just wait and let that metabolism slowly heal over time?
Yeah, I mean, the number one separator there is how long have they been insulin resistant. So if I look at most of the folks in my clinic, they're in their 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th decade of life. They've been around the sun a lot of times. And when their body slumps into the low production of ketones, I mean, I'm going to push on that sardine challenge first. I'm like, you gotta prime the pump again. I mean, I have folks that do a 72-hour sardine challenge twice a month. Some of them once a week. And you're like, why so often? Because it's every time they get out of that tight of a eating cycle, their ketones shut off. And that is a reflection of how sick they are. You should be able to keep, so I do this class twice a year, right? where I lead 200 students and I do all these hard things. Like we do 72 hours of sardines and I'm pricking my finger and it's showing up on the dashboard too. And so I do that 72-hour challenge at least twice a year. I do it more than that, but at least twice a year. And then the next week we do a water fast. And when we watch 200 students who are, some of them, very ill, there is not a one of them that doesn't raise ketones in that sardine challenge. There are people who can't raise ketones when they fast. They're too sick. Their body, as soon as that like stress happens where the resources are zero, the ability for them to mobilize their fat resources, it's like broken. And it's not broken. It just means you have to stress it in a way where the resources are coming in, you get the ketones in circulation, and then you can try water fasting. If you go from a low ketone production in an insulin resistant patient and you try to stimulate the production of ketones with the nothing burger, I mean, Cahill did this in the 70s. It was like 38 days before they were making serious ketones. They did nothing for 38 days on some of these, severely obese patients. Like, there's no way people would do that. And it's not healthy. They sacrificed a bunch of, bone resources and really muscle mass was lost. So we're trying to get them healthier, pushing them and having no ketone production. They feel terrible and they're not helping themselves. Pushing them with a sardine challenge. And then, you did it by the morning fasting ketones were there.
A potential argument could be, I've been doing this for a while. My body's becoming more efficient at using ketones, so I'm not seeing them on the urine strip or in the blood. How do you think about that?
Let's do blood. Urine strip, there's a lot of reasons why you met the need. I mean, again, what is the urine? It means you wasted it. Like, okay, you didn't need it. So there is that potential. Now, I'll tell you, it's really hard to do that. Your body's always overshooting. But so the blood, we don't have to have that argument. We can be confident in our data. Here's what it is. And when that resource is flatlined, I mean, let's say 0.3, 0.4. That's not ketosis. There's no ketone that you get to say ketosis is 0.5 or above. When you're steadily at 0.7, that's different. That is ketone production. Okay. So when I look at people saying, boy, I just use as many ketones as I make, I call BS. I'm like, no, insulin's winning. You're making none. You have the evidence in your finger. Quit lying to yourself and get in the sauna every day for 18 minutes of zone 2 workouts. Stop eating every day at 3:00 for a week. Just give me a week. Do 3 days of sardines only. Just do it. And I have yet to see that argument proven wrong. Like, that's not true. Do a stimulus, a real stimulus, and watch the ketone production happen.
No, I agree with that. I've done your sardine fast a couple times, and you're going to see a lot of ketones. But I still think the argument could be made if somebody's just on a regular ketogenic diet that if they're not in the blood, maybe my body's just producing enough that my mitochondria are using, and then they're not in the blood.
So
not to say we couldn't stimulate them more, but maybe we're at a good equilibrium.
Where do the ketones get made at?
The liver.
Right. And then where do they get used at?
The cells in the mitochondria.
So how do they get there?
Through the blood. But what if the right amount is traveling to the cells, to the mitochondria?
You're still going to have a steady state, though. It's going to be 0.7. If it's 0.3 or 0.4, it's not enough to be you're not getting any medical benefit from it for sure. You got to make more ketones. You got to stimulate somewhere. And I'm a perfect example of that. Those 2 years or 3 years when I was putting on that weight or not losing weight, whatever you want to call that. Yeah, I would wake up in the morning, my ketones were 0.3. I would fast once a week and I'd get ketones of 2 points, lovely. But the rest of the week, I'd wake up in the morning, ketones 0.3, 0.4. Ketones, I knew it. I'm like, it's good enough. It's good enough. It took a hurricane to say, okay. I should stop eating at night. I mean, so I see it. It's hard. When I look at some of the just devastating stories of people who they want the truth. What's the formula? How do I lose the weight? And what I think our jobs are with these megaphones of platforms to teach people is, well, just don't lie to yourself. I was lying to myself. It was zero point 0.3, 0.4. But I did it once a week. I did that good thing. Okay, good job. But if you want to lose weight, you got to fix that other thing and get ketones in the morning to empty that fat mass. Or you'll just be stable or slightly growing.
No, this is good. These are the questions I have.
This is true. Me too. I had them too.
The other piece too I want to make sure we hone in on within this is efficiency of the mitochondria. Could that affect ketones in the blood?
Yeah, I mean, how quickly your body burns that, especially, I mean, the biggest place I see that is the advent of recruiting a new crop. Okay. Like when people come into the 21 day and they've been keto eating 20 carbs or less for a year. I mean, sometimes it's the second or third time they've taken this class because they're like, okay, it worked last time, but I don't think it's not going to work this time. It's not going to work this time. And so their mitochondria are so much better than they were 3 years ago. They do a great job. They are in a ketogenic, I mean, they've got ketones of 0.6, 0.7 most mornings, but they're flatline. They're not losing any weight. You say, well, okay, we need to overshoot. We need to stress and pee some of those calories out, pee some of those ketones out. So they have hardy mitochondria. You can pull on the lever of, well, put them under heat. Put the body in a place where it has to offload the heat, and that's going to spin that mitochondria, get that energy, and you're sweating. Okay. Now you just leveled up that efficiency. That's one thing of burning that heat. But they've been in that mode where they see a ketone, they're going to burn that first. I mean, if you lined up a sugar and a ketone right in front of that mitochondria, it burns it's that keto responsive. So, I mean, there's a slight, I mean, in practical purposes of seeing patients with that problem, there's usually a lever that when they pull it, you can see that they made more ketones and the blood levels went up and they lost the weight.
One area I still need clarity on for myself and likely others is the partitioning of making ketones from body fat versus dietary fat. And as people become more metabolically healthy, how that shifts. Because a common question, somebody new to this could be, I'm putting in all this fat. How is my body ever going to start making ketones from my own body fat? So talk about early on versus later on as we become more metabolically healthy, how the body creates ketones from those two different pools.
Yeah, I mean, at that first season, I don't have any restrictions of how much they eat, how often they eat, just what they eat. Okay, so it's a high fat, the fat goes in, the carbs are so low relative to what they've been doing. So this is a big drop that we drop the insulin and we open up fat cells. So we change the endocrine formula. And then they go through those 6 weeks and they get to that part where they stop, they missed a meal. Like, oh, I just wasn't hungry. Okay, now I know they have fat-based hormones in circulation. And now I'm going to ask you to be more disciplined, that you only get to eat 2 times a day. Calories go through the pie hole twice a day. And even non-calories, that I call it a bolus of food, meaning you put something in your mouth, whether that's got stevia in it with no calories or not, I don't care, 2 times a day, 2 settings a day. And those 2 stay stable until you don't screw that up for at least 7 days straight. So, okay, 2 boluses of food. Now, I'm going to put them in an 8-hour period. Find 8 hours where you don't screw that up. So what's happening here is we've got now time-restricted eating. We've got, you make insulin with mastication when you chew. So this means Tic Tacs, gum, whatever are you doing here, you're insulin resistant. You're not the healthy guy. You're the insulin resistant guy. So don't put that in there. You have 2 boluses of food. So now I know the distance between these 2 meals is no more than 8 hours, which leaves 16 on the outside. So that's 16 hours where your body's going to have to open up some fat cells to keep the resources available. So as we now tick away at these behaviors that crept into your life because of abundance and living in a time where processed foods are everywhere, and it was easy to eat every 2 hours. you're going to come to your first funeral and say, but you got to have the funeral potatoes. That's part of like the dead guy's contract with life. I was going to eat his funeral potatoes. And so there's these places where the rules of how well can you keep that rule of 2 boluses of food in an 8-hour period. And so what am I doing? I'm restricting their intake. Now we're going to move it towards morning because the endocrine system still matters. And not only do I need that 16 hours of no eating, maybe I need 18 hours of no eating. And that morning dawn effect is like their first meal. That cortisol, when the sun rises, hits that liver, releases that glucose. And even though you didn't have a bite, your blood sugar went up. And it wasn't 5 points like it was in the healthy guy. It's 15 points, 10 points, 20 points. And that's the start of eating a meal. That's where you're like, oh, shoot. Okay, so he opened up the gate at 7 o'clock in the morning. Now I need those 2 boluses of food to be before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So, I mean, those are the parameters to say you have to stay ahead of the endocrine. And the endocrine is pathologic. It's doing stuff it shouldn't have done. But that was the consequence of an excessive amount of insulin for 20 years. To get it back down and then not default back up to where you were is until you're at your lean body mass for that same stable weight for what appears to be at least 5 years. These are your rules.
And given the patients you've worked with and yourself, somebody that gets to that 5-year period, are they pretty metabolically similar to somebody who was never metabolically broken?
Yeah, that's the part. That part I have more confidence in than even like Ben Bickman, a expert in mitochondrial disease with insulin resistance. He's a glass half full kind of guy. He's going to say, I think you can reverse it. I think you can reverse it too. But it's a stinker. It's hard. And looking at the equation of, well, what does it look like to have insulin resistance gone? Well, when you go to eat, your blood sugar's 85 before you eat. At the 30-minute mark, your blood sugar never got above 140. Most of my healthy patients, it got to about 120. By the time it's been an hour since you started eating, it's never above 130. And again, most of my healthy patients is lower than that. By the 90-minute mark, you're down to 110. And by 2 hours, you're back to baseline, which is somewhere around 90 blood sugar. If you've ever worn a CGM, that is hard to do. That is hard to do.
Somebody that's regained their metabolic health, obviously there's a lot of different benefits to ketosis, brain health, anti-inflammatory, we could go on and on. But do you feel there's room for carbs once somebody is totally healthy again?
Yeah. I mean, I look at the basic energy expenditure. Like if they're burning it, it's great. But getting to the part where the calories don't get to count if the endocrine is still the tidal wave. If you are still under a blanket of insulin, you don't get to play by those rules. Your calorie stuff doesn't count. You are in the endocrine jail. You've got too much of that hormone. So I don't care if it's 1 bite of an apple, which would have been one of the things I might have eaten at my house when I was not losing weight. That one bite, I'm fine. I make a lot of insulin when that happens. And how do I know? Look what happened when I stopped. Yeah. I wish it wasn't true, but it is.
So for you, you're still in the middle of the journey.
Yeah. And I'm okay there. I think one of the differences between a man or a lady in recovery of alcoholism, and they get to this season where the newbie comes into class and the newbie says, what do you mean you can never have a beer again? And the one who's not arrived says, yeah, it'll be okay though. And they're very stressed about it. And the other one's like, yeah, but this life is so much better. I mean, I do think of that as I love food. I clearly love food. And I probably used it as a place of escape or comfort, like any normal human being did. But the price I paid was a health profile that I have buried a lot of them with autoimmune disorders, with brain injuries, with setbacks that I mean, this life is better. I don't miss it.
All right, Dr. Boss, I know you got to go. You got a patient. I want to respect your time. We're going to link up your YouTube channel. We're going to link up your website, your social media. Really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Well, Jesse, it is great. You are doing great work out there, and I really just feel honored that you asked me to be on your show. It's a wonderful partnership.
Thank you. Now that you're done, you're going to want to stick around here and catch this other incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
If I had to put one demon out there for the chronic diseases that have filled my internal medicine clinic for 20 years, insulin wins. You can say, Doc, I want to check a fasting insulin. And we have lots of people do that. But